What's up everybody, George T from the wagon here. This week we're going to be diving into some engine diagnostics before we do a reseal on this. You may recognize this bug, we've had it in a couple of videos. This is my axle boots that we changed on this, the seams in the factory position. And this is also the one we did the soundboard in. This gentleman has asked me to reseal his engine, and before I just dive into resealing an engine, we want to make sure that this motor is healthy enough to reseal. So we're going to start this, we're going to fire it up, we're going to get up to operating temperature, and we're going to do a compression test on this engine. And from what our compression test tells us, we're going to see how far we go in this video. When you're going to compression test an engine, you have to make sure it's at operating temperature. So we're going to let this thing run for a bit. Let it get warmed up. This visible smoke that you should not see, your motor should not be smoking. I don't care if it's old or new. You shouldn't see anything come out of your exhaust pipe. This is an indicator that we have an issue somewhere. And that's why, before we take the time to actually reseal this engine, which is time and effort, we need to make sure that the health of this engine is worth investing the time into. We've got a couple of factors going against us. That's an H case in the VW world known as the butter case. That's not a good thing. We're a single port engine, and it's just old and tired. When you're underneath this thing, if you saw my axle boot video, the motor is absolutely filthy underneath. Inside here looks beautiful, but underneath it's an absolute mess. So visible smoke is our first indicator that this motor has health issues. When this thing was running before, as I was driving it, you could smell burning oil. That's never a good sign. Like, you know, you got rings going out at that point. When the motor just smells dirty as it's running. You want the motor to almost be borderline sweet smelling when you have a proper mixture. A little bit on the lean side. If you're smelling raw fuel, you're too fat. But if you're smelling like burning oil, there's an issue. You either have valve guides going out or you have rings going out. So we're going to diagnose that and see if this motor is actually worth doing a reseal on. The visual prognosis is not good on this right now. When you see that much smoke and it's been running for a while, it's not a good thing. So that's one strike against it. So we've had this sucker running for a bit. It's definitely at operating temperature. We're running on the fast idle cam right now. That's why it sounds a little elevated, but that's to help warm it up a little faster. We're going to shut it off. Pull all the plugs. Tools that we're going to need. We got a 13/16 wobble spark plug wrench. Spark plug wrench means it has the rubber boot in there to hold a plug on it when you take it out. I got this little tool that actually goes on the end of the plug to help remove it. And we've got a compression tester here. Mine is a Matco. You can pick these up anywhere. Heck, yeah, I think even AutoZone rents them out if you need it. But this is a very crucial tool if you do mechanical work for a living, to help diagnose engines. Right there, a compression tester. So what I've done here is I've made myself like a little cheat sheet here. 1, 2, 3, 4. These represent the cylinders. Each plug will be put on its respective location, and we're going to write down the compression that we record on each cylinder here so we don't lose track of anything. This motor is warm now. You need to take extra special care not to burn yourself, especially when you're dealing with the spark plugs. They're going to be raging hot once we get them out of there. But in order to do a proper compression test, the motor should be at or close to operating temperature. So we're going to go ahead and start pulling plugs here. We're going to do it in a timely manner. It's of course going to cool off while we're doing this, but that's to be expected, and we understand that. But as long as we're close to operating temperature. All right, so a tool change there, going to the shorter extension. When you're doing a compression test, you want to make sure you got a charged battery, and you want to make sure that all 4 plugs are pulled, because you want the motor to rotate as fast as possible while you're doing it to get the most compression out of it. If you've got a dead battery and it's just roar, 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 that's not going to work for a compression test. Get your jump box out and get that dude charged. These are going to be hot. Be aware of that, like hot, hot. Auto lights. What is wrong with people? Bosch or NGK. Don't run anything but that in our VWs, guys. Preferably Bosch WR8ACs for factory motors. All right, so I'm going to get all 4 of these plugs pulled, and then I'll show you how you hook up a compression tester to it. So I've hooked up a switch to the starter here, so I'll be able to crank the motor while we're at the back of the car over there. Your compression test kit will have multiple adapters for different engines. For a VW, it's 14 by 1.5 is our plugs. So basically you're going to go in with this part of it, and you screw it in as if it's one of your spark plugs into the head. There we go. Our adapter screwed in. It has like a coupler fitting here. I'll put it there. Make sure it's got no pressure in it from the last test. Then I have my trigger here. All right, that's about the max we're gonna get out of that. And that right there is 90 PSI, is what it's showing right there. This is on the borderline of not running. So this is when I say that you need, before you waste the time to do a reseal on an engine, make sure the health of the engine is up to par. At a 90, my suggestion for this would be minimal to re-ring it, but realistically with labor costs and sending out things to be machined, we'd almost be better off replacing this pistons and cylinder kit with this one. We're going to go on to the next one. Relieve your pressure. Cylinder 1, right, 90 PSI, 90 PSI. We're on cylinder 2 now. (90 PSI). So we have 2 cylinders right now that we call borderline. And I know some people may say 90 is great compression. It isn't great compression. Good compression in this engine would be about, I would say, like 100 to 125, somewhere in that range. 90, like I said, you're on the cusp of not even running anymore. So because we're showing issue, meaning the low numbers, and it's not severely low. I've tested motors where you have like 50, 60. This is low, but we're on borderline. The next thing we're going to do is a leak down test. This one's a little bit better at 95. So cylinder number 3 at 95. With the visible smoke we see when this thing's running, you can tell it's just not efficient. It may not be efficient, but at least they're all somewhat equal. All right, last cylinder to test here. We're on number 4. That one looks about like 97. It's in between the 95 and the 100. So we're just going to call that another 95 because it's more on the 95 side of the line. So what do we do at this point? We got 4 cylinders that not one of them makes 100 PSI when you're doing a compression test on it. And I'm sure there's varying opinions out there that someone's going to say this motor is just fine, go ahead and reseal it. This is not a cheap job here. This is a lot of labor. There's a lot of parts need to be thrown at it. And is it worthwhile to do to this or just run this motor till it actually dies, which could be years from now? I mean, we've had motors before. My brother used to have a motor in his car that we called the Satan motor because you couldn't kill the thing. And I mean, it leaked from every orifice it had, but it always ran, and it actually ran fairly well. So it's not to say this motor is junk, because obviously it's moving the vehicle around right now, but is it worth the time and effort to put in a reseal on this particular engine? Or would this guy be better off getting a new motor for it? So this is something that I'm going to have to bring up to the customer. I think at this point what I'm realizing is with the level of 90 across the board, 95 being our high, in my opinion, I don't want to waste the time to do a reseal on it, because the problem is I put my time and effort into it and I'm married to this thing. And I don't want to be married to a motor that has that low of compression off the word get. It's time to contact David and see what he wants to do about this. As I pulled the plugs, I put them on their respective locations. This one here was our trouble cylinder that was unplugged. And now you cannot go off of what you're seeing right here. That's super black and people go, oh, this car's running super fat. It's not running super fat. We had it idling for quite some time in the shop to get it up to operating temperature, and this is to be expected. You can actually see that the spark plug started doing its cleaning cycle when I was starting to rev it. A motor needs to be at a consistent RPM for a certain amount of time, and the spark plugs will start to clean themselves. If you're checking your plugs at idle, unless you have a perfect mix at idle, it's usually going to show rich like this. And all 4 of them are pretty consistent. Once again, you can see it started cleaning up, you know, how it's coming clean across there. It started cleaning up as we were revving the engine and getting the R's up a little higher, but these are all super sooty. And this is only a single port with a little 30-pit carb on it. It's not dual carbs. We didn't have a stuck float. We didn't have anything like that with it. We did have a plug wire that was off for an excessive amount of time, but that I don't think did any damage to anything that wasn't already there. You don't see a lower number on that one cylinder than you do the rest. You know, we have the consistent 90 on this side and consistent 95 on that bank. My recommendation is going to be we look into engine replacement at this point. With the fact we're on an H, which is considered the butter case, it's leaking from every orifice it has, meaning I would have to remove the cylinders on this one to get a true reseal on it. That's going deep into it. And if I'm removing the cylinders, I'm going to say, hey, why don't we put a new piston and cylinder set on it so we get better ring seal? And then it's going to go into the heads. Well, hey, why don't we drop these heads off and have them all machined and freshened up? And now we just spent the money that we would have if we just would have bought a new long block and just put it in there. So this is a decision that this gentleman's going to have to make when I give him his options. This is for doing leak down tests. So we know we got these low numbers across here, and we want to know where is our leak coming from. So what you have to do is you have to bring every cylinder up to its firing position. So we'll adjust that by turning the crank pulley and putting the distributor on its respective cylinder. We'll put the car in gear with the e-brake on so it can actually crank the motor. We actually put pressure into this with our compressed air on this end, and this end will be going to this here with our adapter on the end of that. So what we're doing then is we fill up the combustion chamber with pressurized air. This is going to tell us our percentage of leaking. How much are you actually losing? So you can see they have it listed here as high, moderate, low, and set. When you first build a motor, you can leak test it. So when I built my motor, I leak tested. This is when the rings aren't seated anything, and we were only getting about 7 to 10 psi or percentage of leakage, and that's what you want. Once the ring's bed, it should be even lower. I've seen people like Steph and them, they do their tests and they're getting 0 leak because the fact that he does the hardness testing on his hone and everything like that, all these little things make a difference in an engine. So we're going to pressurize the cylinders. We're going to see what kind of leakage we're getting on each cylinder, and then I'm going to show you how we diagnose what's leaking in the cylinder. So how did I get on each cylinder? This indicates what number cylinder we're on, and there's marks on your pulley that indicate whether you're a top dead center or bottom dead center. So for number 4, I'm on bottom dead center. There's a little tiny dimple in the pulley on the backside there that lets me know I'm on bottom dead center, and the distributor itself is aimed at number 4 plug wire. So that's what you're doing. You have to make sure when you're doing a leak test that you are at the top of every stroke. So that's the simple way of doing it. Turn the motor until you get to the corresponding cylinder you're working on at that point in time. I've screwed in my adapter to the leak down tester. That goes into this here. And then we're going to run a compressed air line into there. In order to prepare for that, the motor is now on number 1 cylinder, and that's the cylinder I've screwed my adapter into. So now we're going to pull the e-brake and put it in gear to make sure the motor can't move once I actually put the pressure to the cylinder. First thing we do is we set this up with 100 psi going to it, and we set this to 0. So I have your cylinder leakage tester. Now we're going to apply the compressed air to it. We need to set that needle to 0 with this pressure regulator. Okay, we're going to set to 0. So now we're going to hook up our leak tester to it. All right, let's look at that. We have 40% leakage. So that leakage is now coming out. You can hear the hissing. This pressure is going somewhere. So the hissing will either come through the rings, and you'll hear that in the case. It will come through the intake manifold, and you'll hear that in the intake, or it'll come out of the exhaust, and you'll actually hear it in the exhaust pipe. So right now, I'm not hearing anything out of that carburetor. I'm not hearing anything out of the exhaust tip, but I'm hearing a consistent hiss coming out of my crankcase, which tells me that my rings are what's leaking right now. And at 40% leakage, so they're calling this moderate cylinder leakage. I'd say excessive, but they got a different opinion than I do. So 40% leak down is what we have going on there. It's actually closer to about 45. We're actually going to call that 42.5. So for cylinder 1, write 42.5 leak. And it's showing up consistently at that 42.5. All right, you see we're still back at 0 there. So now I'm going to go through each cylinder and see what we're coming with on each number. I would assume our compression numbers were similar. I would probably guarantee that our leak test numbers are going to be pretty similar on those as well. We are on cylinder 2 right now. And look at that, almost identical. This one has a touch more. So let me just reset that 0 just to make sure. I mean, we were right on 0 there. That one seems to be holding about 30. Same thing. Hearing it coming from the cylinders or from the crankcase, meaning we got ring issue there as well. Didn't hear it at either one of those. It makes sense. We weren't far behind as far as 90 to 95, and you can see that this has less leak down on cylinder 3 than it does on 1 and 2. Not much, but a little bit less. So I'm going to put this down. We're at the 35 mark, a little bit above it, so I'm going to put this one at 37% leakage. All right, this is our last cylinder. We're just going to zero this out. All right, almost identical at 37. Once again, I'm hearing it there, not hearing it there, and definitely not hearing it out of the exhaust. So my suspicions about this engine were correct. From the smell of it, you could tell it wasn't running well and it was actually burning oil. That's the first indicator of bad rings on an engine. We have consistently low compression all the way around and consistently high leakage on all 4 cylinders. They're all within 5% or 5 psi of each other. So that tells me that this motor is in need of new rings at the minimum. And once again, this can snowball. At that point, why don't we split the case? Why don't, it just turns to a whole mess here. If David wants the motor resealed, we will reseal it. I will not be liable. I will not guarantee anything, nothing of that nature when it comes to something like this, because I'm already recommending at this point that this would be a candidate for a rebuild. But when someone sees our motor and it looks this nice and, it actually runs well when you're driving it, it zips around, but it's smoking like crazy. It doesn't smell good when it's running. This is a problem. There's also a 68. This car requires smog in Las Vegas, and visible smoke is usually an instant fail right there. So we need to see what our plan of attack is going to be on this. But that's a pretty basic diagnostic tool that we use there, a compression tester. Once you get compression tested and say, in real world scenario, say if we had 125, 125, 125, 90, then we know like, hey, we got one dead hole in this thing and the other 3 are nice and strong. So there's most likely a problem at this one cylinder. But since that isn't the case, it's most likely just an old motor that's tired, that someone dressed up a little bit with some fanciness on the outside, whoever he purchased this vehicle from, but the motor itself was not in the best shape. So we're going to see where we go at this point, what decision is made by the owner to see what route we're going to take. I will make my recommendations, but they're just that, they're recommendations. It's going to be up to him to make his decision on what he wants. We've done our compression test. We already know we have the wrong plugs. We'll be replacing these with WR8AC Bosch plugs to go back in there. And I pulled off the valve cover, and this is what we're looking at. If you're familiar with a lack of maintenance, that's exactly what it looks like. I mean, this is literally what they call sludge. That is it right there, just covering that. And this is all just lack of maintenance. Oil is cheap, people. Oil is real cheap compared to the price of an engine. Look how much buildup is on that. It looks like there's an O-ring on that sump plate. That's just trash. I talked it over with David. The decision we made is the motor actually runs well. So we're gonna leave the motor alone. We're not gonna re-ring it anything. I'm gonna replace these with some JCs because this is part of the leak, but definitely not all of it. I told him cylinder base will still leak. We are going to check in the oil cooler. Do you see how wet that is right there? That's usually a dead giveaway your oil cooler is leaking. So I'm gonna put my camera in there and see if I can see it. And if the oil cooler itself is leaking in the tower, then we'll be fixing that. But this is just such a shame. This motor runs so well, and had the previous owner just done regular interval oil changes. We're not asking for miracles, just at least every 3,000 miles. Another decision we made is we're going to add a sump to this. We're going to do an empty deep sump on it. The reasoning for that is more oil, less chance of it being overworked. Since this engine is burning the oil already, the more oil we can keep in the engine, the better off we'll be. Someone took the time to make that motor look really pretty, and this is what they were working with. So when you're buying a Volkswagen, it's always a good idea to do a compression test on the engine if you can. If not, the simple test, smell the exhaust. Like I said, I could tell before we did the compression test that this motor was burning oil. You can smell it. It smells like it's running very dirty. And believe it or not, these motors are very efficient and usually run very clean. We get our JC push rods in with the JC seals. We purchased a sump from Ross Wolf along with a Ross Wolf sump plate on the bottom with the Viton gasket on the sump plate and in between sump and case. We did a little basic cleanup here. If you remember from earlier in the video how filthy it was, just a quick cleanup. And I have driven it, and unfortunately we do still have leaks at the base of the cylinders. Our oil cooler is not leaking. We had that bolt right there giving us some real mess coming out of it. So I did a really generic fix on it, just coated it with some RTV, and it seems to be holding up well. But all in all, we have achieved what we want to achieve here. We got extra capacity for the engine to work off of. It is consuming the oil and leaking the oil. So if you just have your standard 2 3/4 quarts in there, you're going to go through it real quick with 2 consumers on it. So now we have a total of, I'd say, 4 1/4 quart in here now, which is great. It's a good addition to it. So where does that leave us with this? This will drive and drive and drive until it doesn't. Like I said, we've gotten years of use out of engines that seem like they're on the cusp of exploding, and they seem to last a lifetime. There's a quick update on that axle seal. Still facing back like we went for on that one. This one in my upward position, still doing good as well. All right, guys, so that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. It's really appreciated. And let's not forget, I know we're still in 2024, but that new year is right around the corner. And October 2nd through the 4th at the Orleans Hotel Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, we got one crazy weekend brought to you by Let's Talk Dubs, The Wagon, and we'll see who else is on board for it this year. I know we have Pedalworks. I know we got Ross Wolf. We got a lot of guys on board. We'll have a whole list of vendors that are going to be there. We've got a bigger space this year, 4 times the size of what we had last year. If you were there last year, you saw we filled that space to capacity. Well, the Orleans is on board, and they gave us a bigger space to go off of. It's even more secure than the space we had last year, which is freaking awesome. So don't forget, go to letstalkdubs.com and get your registration done. Make sure you're pre-reg. We had to turn people away who weren't pre-reg this year, so get yourself pre-registered for this event. Also on letstalkdubs.com, you can book your rooms. Imagine that. You get your room codes. Get that room booked, because 30 days before the event, they cut them off. And when they cut them off, we can't do anything about it at that point. We've been telling you all year, and you still wait till the last minute to get your room. Make the plans. Get out to Vegas. It is a great time. We had so much fun. And this year, we got 2 extra things happening. One of them being a bowling tournament. And you'll see you're bowling that bowling tournament, because this hand right here, she knows how to throw a ball. That's right. I used to be a league bowler. Champion for a couple of years with our team. We had a good time with it. And I got a lot of VW friends who bowl as well. So we're going to have a great time with it. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.